stress, uncertainty, insecurity about life, money, and existence. Every generation is affected. Small kids, we earning, the elderly ones. And now we have been asked to live with this. Well, how can we live this peacefully when there are so much disturbances and problems in our own surroundings? What can help us? How can we mind our mind so that we can see a patient peacefully and then treat them? How can we sustain and then grow in this pandemic? How can we bounce back? These all are the questions coming in my mind. Well, wait, we are not going to give you the answer for this, but definitely a way to handle this. And to guide us, may I ask Amar to introduce our speaker who will guide us to this pandemic. The doctors, how can they lead and this uncertainty, insecurity, and safety? Amar, over to you.
As soldiers are there on front line, the same thing we are fighting the invisible enemy. As a doctor, we are on the front line, and there are a lot of emotions currently. A lot of people are having anxiety, depression, even griefs. As colleagues are, there are news of colleagues are dying. Then there is a insecurity. There are financial issues. Multiple issues are there. So here we request Dr. Rajendra Barve, who is an excellent orator in the mindfulness. He is a psychiatrist, leading psychiatrist from Mumbai. He was a teacher he was lecturer at Nair Hospital in Mumbai. He is practicing since last 35 years. He received first rank in the his psychiatry in Mumbai University. Also, so he had special interest in meditation. Along with psychiatry, we need to do something else. So he searched, he investigated all of meditation techniques, and he found mindfulness is the one of the technique which can be very useful in day-to-day life. He studied it thoroughly from Pagoda Meditation Center at Colombo under the auspices of Bhante Ananda. He is called as Sugat Acharya. Sugat Acharya means the student of uh, the divine Buddhist studies. He is also a writer. He has written more than 25 books in Marathi on mental health. He is interviewed by many times by national and international media. Also, he is doing a phone-in program in ABP Maza since last 4 years. He is married. He has a daughter and son and two lovely grandchildren. Can you guess his age? So he will be completing 67 in few days. So we want to know about his youthfulness, how mindfulness was helpful for him in his busy practice. So Dr. Rajendra Barve, please start and give us good guidance on mindfulness in this critical situation. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Amar, and thank you, Chetan. It was really wonderful of you to call me. Recently, we did this session for psychiatrists in Pune and other places, Thane. And I thought it's really worth spending time for the doctors as well as for me to come and talk to you because these are very, very difficult and critical times that we are passing through. As you very rightly said, Chetan and Amar both. And as psychiatrists, as doctors, we have always reached out to the community, be it a tsunami or a Killari earthquake or Bhuj earthquake. We have already always reached out to the community, helped them, served them. But this pandemic is something so unusual, so much unheard of, so much unwarranted, unexpectedly has hit us. And I think the way the medical community has reacted to it, responded to it is really, really very creditable to them. But we must basically understand how this pandemic is different from other critical situations that we have faced. You know, as very rightly, right in the beginning, Chetan said that everyone is affected. Even if I go and help people in earthquake, my family is not affected. They just miss me, that's all. But now the time is that everyone is at risk. My family, myself, the community, the workers, everyone is at risk. So though I'm helping, I have so many stressful moments in my life. There are moments when I really feel, what am I doing? What is the purpose? Why I'm doing all this? So this has caused lots of distress to doctors. And as we see, some doctors have lost their life also. So it's a very, very distressful situation for the frontline workers as well as their families and kith and kin. So I think at this point of time, as a medical fraternity, we must understand how people generally respond to pandemics. There have been many studies in last 10, 15 years. There have been pandemics of various kinds. There have been SARS, there's been mad cow disease and Ebola. So people have gone through this, and they have found a way in which the community responds to this. First, there is, of course, for anything, there is a shock. ये तो नहीं हो सकता. I mean, this is impossible. It's not happening. It's not happening with us. It's not my country, my city, my place. No, not truth. So we are in a denial mode for some time. And then following that denial, in pandemic, usually there is a phase of heroism. That means we saw, the Thali Pita, warriors, and they are the heroes. So there is a phase of heroism. Everybody wants to contribute in a big way. And then there is a phase where we find that there is kind of a honeymoon. That means we realize that, well, it is there now, we have to work on them. So people started singing songs. There were so many songs about how to remain at home. The film stars came, everyone came. So it's like we have come to understand what the pandemic is all about. And then time goes on, and then the unlock period comes, and we realize that this is a phase of disillusionment. Sorry to say, but it's a phase of disillusionment. The community spread is happening. We see all the time, what we see on the television is this disillusion phase. But most of the pandemics following the disillusionment phase, there is a phase is called innovation phase or resilience phase. So I thought it's very important that since we are in the disillusionment phase, we need to learn to be resilient. And we need to learn to be resilient, and we must be aware of the resilience, and we must practice resilience, which is very important. That reminds me of a story of a samurai who was was a very expert in his sword fights, and he approached a Zen guru, and he said, "Look, I am doing all that I can do, and I've been fighting wars, and I've been successful so far, but I still don't understand myself completely." So he said, "Why don't you come and stay in my ashram?" So he starts staying there, and the samurai is waiting for the teacher to come. But the teacher never comes. He waits for days, weeks, but the teacher never approaches him. So finally, the samurai says, "Well, it's time for me to say goodbye, because this is just a fraud. There's no teaching. It's just like, like any other Baba or something." So he goes and confronts the Zen guru and says, "Look, you have cheated me. I've learned nothing here. And before I go, I would like to ask you a question." And the guru says, "Okay, well, ask me a question." The question he asked is very, very interesting. He says that, "I have heard these two words, uh, uh, hell and heaven. जन्नत का नाम सुना भाई, जहन्नम का भी नाम सुना है, स्वर्ग है, नरक है. So what is the difference between these two words? Guruji, tell me, what is the difference?" So when the guru hears this, he just laughs out very loudly. And when he laughs out loudly, the samurai is very, very angry, and he pulls his swords and marches towards the guru. And the guru looks into his eyes, sees his eyes are red. He's very angry, very upset. He looks at him and says, "I'm answering your question. You asked me what is the difference between heaven and hell. Right now you're in hell." So the samurai is struck with this. It's like a lightning for him, and he sits down. His sword falls down from his hand, and he closes his eyes, and he's in meditation state, the mindful meditation. And the guru comes and says to him, "Look, few moments back you were in hell, but right now you are in heaven." And this is what mindfulness meditation is all about. It makes you aware of what you are. It makes you aware what kind of feelings you have, what kind of ideas you are harboring, what kind of thoughts you have, what kind of actions you are taking. And right now you are very much aware. So the samurai says, "This is very great, but I knew all along that heaven and hell are not places where dead people go. They are there for people who are alive. All these years you knew this, but this is a moment of truth for you because now you have realized it. So what is very important at this point of time is when there is so much of distress, we tend to forget what we have learned. That's why awareness is a very, very important aspect of mindfulness and of resilience. So, as the samurai woke up to a new reality, we are also waking up to a new reality. I think I'll start with my slides. Just give me a second, I'll switch the slides on.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Can you see the slide?
Yes, yes, properly.
Okay. So, it's really a namaste. Uh, and this word, you may be surprised to see this word new normal. We have heard about what is normal, but what is new normal? So, friends, new normal was a phrase coined for the very first time in 2008 debacle, and the Great Depression was there in 2008, and the financial institutes coined this word called new normal, telling the whole world that look, when this phase is over, it's not going to be just like as if it never happened and everything is going to come back to normal. There has to be a new normal, and the new normal will have a completely different way of looking at your financial world. It's going to be a different thing for everyone who are working in the financial institutes. So I think the new word that was coined then has come to reality not only for financial institutes but for the whole world. The whole world is now getting into a new normal. And the first thing that in new normal is the great Indian thought of saying namaste has come in, wherein we are folding our hands, not extending our hands, and maintaining social distance and saying that I respect you, I respect that you are maintaining a physical and social distance. And look, I don't have my hands are clean, they are folded, so I'm not going to touch you. So I think this new normal namaste will become very soon the Indian way of greeting and being with people. And this is how the new normal is going to start. So in doctors' health, doctors are tremendously under stress because of various things that this poses terrible risk to doctors because we are all duty bound. We have number of duties which are competing with each other. That means we have duty towards patients. We also have to protect ourselves, not take undue risk. We have duty towards family because once we reach home, we may transmit this infection family. Then we have duty towards our colleagues. We have duty towards society and duty to upgrade our knowledge. So at given time, doctors are under tremendous stress. And for last 20 years, there have been very many studies in most of the reputed journals, British Medical Journal, BMJ, Lancet. They're always telling that the medical fraternity is currently one of the most stressed community in the world. And now in the pandemic, it has become worse than what it was earlier. So, in one of the study in Delhi hospital, Safdarjung Hospital, they did an online study, and that they found that those who responded to their questionnaire, 30% people said that we are feeling very depressed. Now, when we say depression, we don't mean depression in a very clinical sense. When we mean depression is feeling loss of energy, feeling that we have lost the battle, feeling that we cannot fight anymore. So this is the sign of depression. You can't see classical syndromal depression in the current times. When people will start talking, you realize that they're talking a little slow, not as fast as I'm talking. They're usually talking slow. There'll be more sighing that you will see in patients. There'll be pauses where when patient is relating his history to you, suddenly there'll be a pause because there is a mental block and he says, really, I can't get ideas. These are the signs of depression. A general practitioner might see, a surgeon might see, obstetrician, gynecologist will see that the patients have their energy level seems to be really low. then they will also complain that they're feeling very anxious. Now, this anxiety in general and anxiety in pandemic is also different. This anxiety that we see in pandemic is truly a preoccupation with feeling anxious. That means anxiety is constantly running in the background. Suddenly there is silence, and suddenly you remember, oh, one of my colleagues died. Oh, there are people in my building, in my community, in my around my area. They have been tested positive, and you start feeling anxious. Or there could be panic attack. That means you suddenly press the panic button and say, oh my God, what's going to happen? You sneeze, or you hear somebody sneeze, or some elderly person at home says that I'm feeling a little tired today. This happened in my own home, and we just panicked and thought, oh my God, what's happening now? People also complain of sleep disorders. That means they lie down, wake up at 3 o'clock. I just last night my sleep was disturbed because somebody called at 3 o'clock and said that, look, I can every day I seem to wake up at 2:30 or 2 o'clock, and then there is sudden panic. I really can't fall off to sleep. It's like then there is nothing else, and all these thoughts about death, pandemic keep on troubling me. So sleep disorder is something which people are complaining a lot now. There are also eating disorders. That means people may, you will see so many, everyone is talking about recipes and social media and the WhatsApp, and they talk about this, but they talk about this. How many people are really enjoying eating? That's the real question. Because we have to engage ourselves in that emotional state of enjoying food. That doesn't seem to be happening because mind is constantly preoccupied. The word is very important, preoccupied with anxious thoughts. And of course, this leads to suicides. Of course, we have heard people who tested positive and committed suicide, tested positive and a myocardial infarction, tested positive and doesn't know what to do, just walked out of their life. So these are the things that we see in the community in a very big way. And particularly in Corona Warriors, I've met few of them, and they've been talking about how they have been working in the hospitals and how they find it so difficult. Why? Because in pandemic, the situation of a Corona warrior is very different because he sees that when a patient is dying, usually in all situations, there is a family member waiting outside. You have to break the news. They cry, they weep. But here, people die lonely, and that eats their mind. That at the last moment there is no one to hold their hands. We are the only ones, and what we see in their eyes only fear and anxiety and fear of death and fear of extreme loneliness. So when people are treating, helping such patients, it takes away, saps our own energy. And particularly we see that in Corona Warriors, there is anticipatory anxiety. What might happen tomorrow? What might happen next minute, in few seconds? And of course, there is stigma that people may not be able to see you the way they have been seeing you earlier. There is fear. And of course, there are every day you hear about threats on doctors' life when they announce the death of a person. So it's a very, very trying time. And now is the time that we want to create this new normal. And what does this new normal mean? It's a time to take a pause. Many people have said this pandemic is like a pause in the civil society, in the community, in the human culture. There is a pause where we need to stop and think about what are we doing, what are we up to, and we begin to ask questions, not only what we know, what we have achieved so far, but we ask a question: who we are, what kind of race are we, what are we racing? It's like there is such tremendous race all around us. To do what? Where are we going? Everything needs to be faster and faster and faster. But where are we going? Where are we leading this? So when we stop, take a pause, what do? We just look inside. We introspect to find out what is really going wrong within us, not with the whole world, but within us. And we decide that we would like to discard something that we really don't want. We don't want to live a life which has this kind of lifestyle. So we want to get rid of some of the lifestyle issues, and we want to live more peacefully, more at ease, more less under pressure, and then we'll be able to do what we really want to do, and we live more authentic life. So we'll construct a new identity that is authentic to ourselves, to what we are to as human beings. And you Homo sapiens, the sapiens means the wisest community, the wisest race. So let's become that wise race. Now, I've seen talking to people, I've seen my patients calling me day in and day out, and also some of the new cases which come back to us and report to us. And I one word which keeps on coming back to me, and that is we are converted into mindless beings. What is a mindless? What is mindlessness? When people are not cognitively engaged, they are not thoughtfully engaged in what they're doing. There's no thought. We are driven by fear and depression. Like I said, the preoccupation of fear and depression constantly drives us. It's not our engagement with reality. It's not our engagement with our cognitions. It's not engagement with the purpose. We're just doing it and what we call as auto mode. We are in a simply autopilot mode. We are just becoming mindless people, and we are the people who are dwelling in the past or worrying about the future. And what I see now is since last week, I'm getting calls where people have said that they have been anxious, but they have come to a point where they realize that nothing can be done. It's not only depression, it's like there is no adrenaline pump, there is no adrenaline, flowing in my system. There is no steroid left in my body. I just feel burnout. I just feel that I'm not living. And this is what last week that I'm getting calls are from doctors, some of the corona warriors. So this is a phase of burnout. This is the phase of disillusionment. And we need to really pick up our threads and get rid of this autopilot mode, not be mindless, and just create a new reality, new self for ourselves. That is the whole purpose. That is resilience. That is coming back to our own selves, discovering the sapiens part of our Homo sapien within us. So, what is resilience then? Of course, like many words in biological science, they are derived from material science. Resilience is defined in material science as quickly return to usual shape after being bent, stretched, or pressed, simply called elasticity. This is borrowed from material science. But when you talk of resilience, it's not stretching, it's not pressed, it's coming back to normal. That means bouncing back to normal. And not only normal, quickly getting back to normal and becoming tough. It's like the phoenix rising from the ashes. It's like rising from what is left for us and become happy and successful in whatever that we have been doing. Find our own goals, find our own desires, find our own hope. And that is what resilience is all about. So when something bad or something difficult happens to us, we need to get back to normal life, but not just normal life, become resilient. And this resilience became a very, very important area of discussion among the mental health fraternities following 9/11. They studied number of people who survived 9/11. That means who could get out of the building and people who had lost their lives. And they have been doing a lot of research in these people who have survived and kith and kin of the survivors, of the people who are dead. And they could distinguish that there are some people who are resilient and some people who have lost. And how resilient people are different than the people who seem to be lost. Now, this also dates back to some studies which were called this resilience. Earlier was called in 80s and 90s. This was called hardiness of a person, and they wanted to study hardiness in people who are expected. That means they're under tremendous stress. There is a lot of genetic loading in myocardial infarction, but they still seem to be surviving. Not only surviving, they seem to be thriving on stress. How
Voice issue, no? Chetan?
they
बर्वे सर आवाज क्लियर होत नाही.
Barve sir, some internet issue is there. We'll just check for a minute. Yes, sir. Sir, yes.
am I am I audible and
Yes,
visible?
now you are audible and
Okay.
presentation has gone.
Okay, okay,
Again,
okay,
share the screen, please.
okay. I will have to share the screen.
Yeah.
And am I audible?
Yes, yes,
Clearly audible, sir.
Okay, can you unmute me for a minute?
yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
Yash,
So everyone will wait for a few minutes. Barve sir is wonderful orator. He talks very nicely on various topics. Last time also he has taken one mindfulness lecture. It was wonderful. He is also taking some courses in mindfulness. Yes, sir.
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, okay.
yeah.
So, am I audible?
Yes, yes, sir.
And the screen, the slide is seen.
Yes, slide is
Yes,
there.
sir.
Okay, fine. So we reached the point where we're talking about hardiness. People who constantly feel they're in control of the situation, and it's like many patients come back to us and says, you are controlling authority, and we have to tell them no. You may think they are controlled, but actually you are in control of yourself. The locus of There is a study called locus of control, which is very popular study in the psychiatry and mental health field. Other doctors who are non-mental health field may not be aware of this, but we call this locus of control. Where is the locus of control? If the locus of control is within me, I can control situations. I can control myself. When do I control myself? Only when I know where I am. It's like I can control the car only when I know at what speed I'm going. Where is the brake? Where is the pedal? Where is everything? When in panic state we lose all that and we feel it's not, the car simply goes on auto control and there is a disaster. So feeling that you are in control is very, very important. See it as a challenge is very important. So hardy people see things as things under control, things being challenged. They don't see it as a threat, but they see it as a challenge, and also they can see that they are confident in handling situations. So if hardiness is what was talked about in the about a couple of decades back, we are talking about resilience, and resilience is now connected how to become resilient. So though I said there are people who are born resilient and some people are not born resilient, but what mental health science has found is that resilience, if you look at it only as a trait, as only as a DNA story, then we can't really make people resilient. So they said, let's find out what are the skills of resilience. How can one practice resilience? It's not that you are born resilient, so you survive. You're not born resilient, sorry, I can't do anything for you. No. So they say resilience is something, is a skill which can be taught to people. And what is the first thing that they say about resilience when we start teaching the skill of resilience? Very important, the skill of resilience. Why I'm saying repeatedly skill? Because skill is something that can be learned by practice, while trait is something which you are just born. So you may be of any color, creed, race, nationality, you can always learn skills. So it's like the brain is capable of learning many, many skills. And one of the skill is talking about resilience. And the very first skill of resilience is the power of presence. As you'll see in denial phase, I just talked about, in denial phase, we don't accept the reality. So when the reality creates so much of uncertainty, we simply deny it. But in resilience, the first step is to come back to the reality. The reality may be threatening, the reality may be really bad, but we want to remain present in the reality. We don't want to escape, we don't want to run away, just face the uncertainty. And this is very important because in the current community, we have people who have very low frustration tolerance. Their idea of getting the instant is so much in our mind. Food is fast, instant coffee is there, everything has to happen within seconds. So, in face of uncertainty, can we remain composed? Can we keep our presence of mind? It's a very important skill that we can learn. So people who are aware, when they live in the present moment, they live in the present moment and they are not dwelling in the past or worrying about the future. Very, very simple. Oftentimes, and you may not be aware that the patients or people or us, we may not be aware that this is actually happening because most of it is at unconscious plane. And look, many times, very, very ordinary. I give example very often that you go to the bus stand and you see the bus is not there and you say, oh, it always happens with me that I always miss my bus, I always miss my train, it always happens to me. This comes from the unconscious. That means we are not aware, we are generalizing things. We are overgeneralizing things and we are minimizing that we can control situation. So in the present orientation, you might say, oh, it's 8:15, the next bus maybe at 8:20 or 25 or something, or can I find something else to do? So remaining present centered could be as ordinary skill as waiting for the lift to come. It could be as simple as waiting for food being served. Waiting as simple as when your nurse hands over the artery forceps to you, as surgeons might become impatient. So remaining aware is very important. Remaining present oriented is very important. And this present orientation is the moment. And every moment we remain present and moment to moment we keep on living. So though we say that we are living continuously, we live breath to breath, breath to breath. And are we aware of this breath? So that's very important because when we become aware of the breath, that's the first step of coming back to reality, experience the presence, and just not the presence, but the power of the presence. The first skill of resilience is about power of presence. So when we want to shift from being mindless, autopilot mode to mindfulness, when I say mindless, I am not using this term as in a pejorative way, in a wrong way. No, not at all. I'm saying there are many, many skills which are very important, which are so hardwired within us that we work on autopilot. And that's fine. We take bath, we walk, we eat food, we shower, we talk to friends, dial or whatever. This is absolutely autopilot mode, which is helpful to us. But we must know that we are on autopilot now. If we know that we are on autopilot, it's okay. So from mindlessness to mindfulness, we just have to think of 4 verbs. Number 1 is we are in a reacting mode. From reacting mode, we want to go to a respond mode. That means I may be angry and I may have to feel like screaming or shouting, but that may be a reaction. My response could be entirely different. So in response, we have to choose a response. Resilience is all about choosing a response. And I always give this example of like we have this our mobile phones. Whenever we are busy, when we don't want to take a call, we say, look, I'm busy, I'm in theater, I'm eating, or I'm driving or something. So the factory or the mobile, the handset gives its own template. And the last one is customize your template. A response is customizing your response to a situation. Because reaction is something that happens automatically. We are on autopilot. It's a reflex reaction, but respond is a thoughtful reaction. So responding Not reacting is very important. And when we are responding, we are thoughtfully doing things. So then the stage of recovering from the trauma. We cannot say that trauma will not affect us. It's definitely going to affect us, definitely going to make us feel sad and upset about things, but we want to recover from it. But when we stop, because in reaction, we lose our energy. In responses, we select our energy. We decide what we need to do. We decide how to use the energy. That's why there is enough energy for us to recover and then rebounds, rejuvenate, and find something new about ourselves. That's a new normal. That's a new person that we are going to do. And this skill is possible when we talk about bounce back with mindfulness. So mindfulness is what? Mindfulness was first used as a word way back in 18th, 19th century by Rhys Davis, who translated the Buddha's almost all the texts into English, and it means Samma Sati, which means that we are aware. We are aware of what's happening now. Samma is inclusive, complete, good, correct knowledge of the moment, knowledge of the presence. So mindfulness is about sammasati. Mindfulness is about awareness. So how do you do it? It's a paying attention in a particular way, in a specific way. That means with something which has been taught to us, to see the reality the way the reality exists on purpose. What is the purpose? To discover the reality and not assume the reality. So some of you surgeons will know that we must, when we look, our reaction comes, but then we on purpose we decide to do few things. So on purpose we are completely mindful of what we are doing, and we remain in that present moment, and we are non-judgmental about it. Though we don't talk in terms of right, wrong, what has to be done or not, what is correct, what is incorrect, but just see what it is. You know, as a medical doctors, it's very important for us. Non-judgmental is looking at, doing our first inspection. Who is this person? What's happening to him? Later on, we may think of the diagnosis. Because once we make a diagnosis, we become kind of narrow-minded, we just get into a tunnel vision. So look at situation the way it arises. Pay attention to it. And when we pay attention, what happens automatically? The few things which happen. That we pay attention to self. What am I now? What is the state of my mind? How to control my emotions? How to control my cognitive functions? What thoughts I want to bring in? What memory I would like to pull in? That is what I'm paying attention to. So we say take a pause and recall. And remember that this recall is going to come with a lot of wisdom. So paying attention to self emotional regulation, become curious, we want to know more about it. And when we see it, we also accept, oh, this is what is happening. We don't say why it is happening. Let's see what can be done about it. So the mind tends to become very agile. It's a limber state of mind. It's a mind which is adjustable, which is resilient, which is flexible, which is like elastic. And we keep on working on it now and then. So mindfulness is for every person. Mindfulness is important, more so for doctors. And how did they discover about mindfulness? Very important. In 1979, a very interesting study was published by John Kabat-Zinn. He was from the Massachusetts General Hospital. He was given a bunch of people who had suffered from arthritic pain or some cancer pain or something. And everybody had said, well, we really can't do much about these people because they're just pain and pain and pain, and they have become miserable in their life. As a practitioner of meditation, can you do something about it? And John Kabat-Zinn took it as a challenge and say, let me teach them meditation, mindful meditation. He just taught them Anapana or breath meditation. He taught them for 8 weeks, every day for about 2 hours. At the end of 8 weeks, since it was a research, at the end of 8 weeks, they talked to them again and to find out how was the pain. And 2 important things came out of this research. Number one, their pain threshold was higher. That means they could tolerate pain much better than they could tolerate earlier. So tolerance to pain had increased to one. And second, which is very important at this moment for everyone, more so for doctors, is that the pain may continue, but the suffering was much less. That means suffering is a reaction to what we just talked about everything. We talked about panic anxiety, we talked about anxiety, we talked about suicidal ideas. What is that? What was that? These are the reactions. They're the reactions to painful situations. And these reactions change. So suffering goes down. So when Buddha talked about the first truth, that was the dukkha, that is the suffering, the discomfort that we feel in our life. When we ask a question, why me? Why it is happening now? Why here? Why this point of time? So that leads to suffering. And that is how the mindfulness helps you to stop reacting and start responding, because your emotions are definitely, your emotions. You see these emotions, you experience them, but you see them that I'm feeling this. Then, so it's a, it's a, it's a function that regulates emotions. Once the emotion of fear, anxiety is under control, regulated, we realize that there is better cognitive flexibility. That means we can think of many options. Like I said, the templates are no more there. We have responses, we have flexibility, and we are aware of the multiple perspectives of the moment. So mindfulness is the key with which you can open the door of resilience. Because once you discover that it is possible for us to give a customized response, things start changing. Because we are Homo sapiens after all. We are intelligent people, we are wise people. And when you are in this mindful state, when you practice mindfulness regularly, what happens? Few things happen, which are very, very important. Number one is that without us realizing it, we tend to become very wise. What they say is आपकी प्रज्ञा जागृत हो जाती है. So it's like you kind of learn to transcend the situation. Look at the situation from a different perspective, from a different point of view, the bird's eye view. So it said that in English, it's very said, you see trees or you see jungle. So simultaneously, you'll be able to see the trees as well as the jungle. That is the possibility that comes. That's the wisdom that comes. You are able to see both sides of the coin. So that wisdom rises. Second thing is that when we realize this, there is tremendous amount of compassion, because you realize this is how everyone sees the world. This is how people are suffering. This is why people are suffering, because they are running into the future or they are going back in the past. So their dukkha, their yatana, their suffering is because they are not present moment oriented. And the whole, I was like this. If my friend is like this, my job is to make him aware. Look, be present, be here. So many times when you're talking about mindfulness, I usually start by asking a question: are you here? And some of people who are here in the webinar, just check, are you here? Just check, are you here? Because very next moment your mind will go elsewhere. So, but just be here and now. So this is a very important thing about mindfulness, that number one, that the wisdom rises, you become more compassionate, and you also realize that moment to moment reality is changing. And how does it change? Our physiology class teaches us sodium pump is the membrane is very, very unstable membrane, which is operating in every cell. So everything is impermanent. If some of you have been to Vipassana, the Guruji always talks about anicca. That is anitya, that means impermanence. So in mindful state, these three things, the realization happens. Like the samurai, he knew, but he realized it now that this is the moment. This is the moment of truth. Very important. When I've talked about non-judgmental, non-critical, first thing in mindfulness is that you become compassionate with self. Many times, the mind chatter that goes on in our mind is extremely self-critical. It's extremely judgmental about whom, about self. Why did I do this? Why am I doing this? Why I tend to repeat the mistake? Why this happens to me? We are forever in a critical mode because this is how we are brought up. Our conditioning is such that criticism is something that our teachers thought helps people, but actually it's a compassionate acceptance that helps people. So the self-compassion rises, the self-awareness rises, and the wisdom and the truth of impermanence also rises, and we become very, very calm and become uh, focused on the moment. So this is the story of mindfulness. Like I said, very first step to resilience is mindfulness. So let's practice. Before I practice, I many times refer to some shlok from Gita, because that shows that how the whole idea of mindfulness, how the whole idea of resilience is very much there in Gita. Because you know that for a moment, Arjun felt, he says, Siddhanti mama gatrani mukham cha parishishyate. He was in a mindless state, and Krishna said that this is the moment of truth for you. Wake up, be resilient. Tasmat uttishta kaunteya. Wake up, get up, and be aware of what's happening. Don't imagine things. So Arjun says, how do I do it? So I'm going to just read three shlok to you, and then if time permits, I'll talk about how resilience is defined in Gita terms and how to practice it. So he says, Sparshan krutva bahir bahyan chakshucha antare bhruvoho pranapanav samam krutva nasa bhyantare charino. That means we need to, what is mind? Bring mind back to where it belongs. Bring mind back to the body. As simple as that. Because your mind is jumping everywhere. It's a beautiful way that Buddha always called this is a monkey mind. It's always jumping from one branch to the other branch. So bring it back. And where do you bring it back? Chakshuchata antare bhruvoho. That means bring it back to your own mind. Bring it back to the prefrontal cortex. Pranapanav samau krutva. That means breathe in and breathe out. Look at them as equivalent. Breathe in and breathe out. Inhale and exhale slowly. And how do you experience life? Just experience life as it just, the air moves in and out of your nostril. That's the point of touch. That's a touch point. That's a touch base. That this is, I'm existing this moment because this is what is I'm breathing. And my breath, mind you, though I'm quoting from Gita, breath is the only secular thing in the world. पानी को भी हम गंगा का पानी मानते हैं कि अमृत मानते हैं, or whatever that we may say, but no, air is secular. Then the next thing that he says is that tatrekagram manah krutva yat chittendriya kriyaha upavishyasane yujjat yogam atma vishuddhaye. Very beautifully he says, tatre ekagram manah krutva, that is where you remain focused. And what do? You control all the sensations that come into your brain. That means whatever is reaching your amygdala through your thalamus and spreading everywhere through the limbic system to your prefrontal cortex, be aware that these are the sensations which are disturbing you. The body sensations, like when you ask people to sit quietly at one place, they say, I just want to move. I just feel like scratching. I just want to get up. There is a little pain here and there. My butt pains here and there. There's a body sensation. Can you chittendriya kriya? The sensations are constantly changing. So can you control them? Can you limit them? And when you limit it, you'll realize that they don't no more bother you because they are not there to bother you. And then upavishyasane yujjat yogam atma vishuddhaye. Why do you do this? Because you want to remove all the defilements. You want to remove all this conditioning which makes you feel sad, upset, angry. You want to control it because this is conditioned, and you remove this. So that is atma vishuddhaye. It is not to purify, but to remove. It is defilement of the conditions which are there in our mind. So there are layers and layers and layers of conditioning on our mind. And when we focus our mind on the breath, this conditioning slowly starts disappearing, slowly goes away. So Krishna taught all this, and then Arjun stopped and said, Wow, he must have said, wow, that sounds great, dude. But tell me, and he says, he puts a question and he says, Asamshaya Mahabaho Mano Durnigraha Chalam. Abhyasen tu kaunteya vairagyacha gruhyate. He says, my dear friend, my dear Mahabaho, you're so powerful. My mind is definitely extremely unstable. It's a constantly moving. I'm constantly getting into a mindless state. What do I do with myself? To that, Krishna says, Abhyasenu tu kaunteya vairagya. You can detach yourself only when you do this only when you do this abhyasa. Abhyas here means constantly practice. So when you practice, you are learning to detach yourself from the dukkha, from the suffering that we have. We detach ourselves. I often say that there are two simple sentences which are used. Number one is we say, I am thinking, and we say, I have a thought in my mind. I say, I am sad, or there is sad feeling in my mind. There are two different things, my friends. Our patients don't know this, and we also don't know. I didn't know for a long time that different connotation can come when I say, I'm thinking, then I'm putting my energy. And when I say there is a thought, I'm looking at the thought. I'm looking at my sadness. I'm not sad. There is sadness inside me. You should start distancing yourself. You become more mindful that what's happening to your mind. And that is what is known as the practice of mindfulness. So let's do it for a few seconds. Wherever you are, there is no mantra. There is nothing. You can practice it any time of the day and night. You can practice it while walking. You can practice it while operating. You can practice it while. And right now, I'm practicing it with all of you. Just sit wherever you are. Let your spine be erect. We know for sure that spine has to be respected for its non-natural curves. Then press your shoulders and focus your mind on the breath. And inhale and exhale. We'll just take few breaths together. What did I do? I did something which is very important. I don't know whether you noticed it or not, but what I did was my exhalation was longer than my inhalation. You might ask, that's the best way to control your autonomic nervous system, because inhalation is based on the parasympathetic system, and you give more credence to parasympathetic system in this state of mind. So inhalation should be longer. Now, if you find it really difficult to do it, when you breathe in, let the stomach wall come out, and when you breathe out, let the stomach wall go in. So first breathe out. Now you heard me breathing because I wanted you to focus on it. But actually when you practice it, it can be without any noise of the air that comes in and goes out. Whatever you might be doing, moment you become aware there is something you are feeling uncomfortable, uneasy while doing some procedure, while talking to patient, while working in the hospital, while working in the ward, just take 5 seconds break. Just stop wherever you are. Just pause. Just bring your mind back to the breath. And if you want, you can put your hand on your abdomen. In fact, you can do it with your complete PPE kit also. Put your hand on the abdomen. Breathe in and breathe out, and breathe in and breathe out. This, I say, this is practical mindfulness. This is first aid of mindfulness. It gives instant relief because the parasympathetic system immediately overtakes, and there is a deceleration of the heart. The heartbeats little become slower. We have been taught this in physiology. So this is the first thing that we can do, And this is a very simple practice. Second, you can always do mindful walk. What is mindful walk? When you breathe in, lift your foot. When you breathe out, put your foot down. To begin with, may sound very funny, silly, but you just have to synchronize. The idea is synchrony. Synchrony of the breath, mind, and body. Synchrony of the mind, breath, and body. What is yoga after all? Synchronous activity of the mind, body, and soul. So synchronous activity of the mind and the body. Mind is focused on the breath and is aware of the movement of the body. So that is the focused mind. You can practice this mindful walking. This is known as Chankraman in Buddhist state. But a very, very simple, when you are climbing stairs particularly, you can climb 2 steps, breathe in, 3 steps, breathe out, 2 steps, breathe in, 3 steps, breathe out. Very, very easy. And you can practice this almost any time. So you can do it together with your family. Belly breathing as abdominal breathing is great fun. You can teach this to your children and they will enjoy it and they will learn much faster than you. You know why? Because they are curious. Because they have no conditioning. As doctors say, oh really it helps, I don't know how it helps, will it help me, am I doing right? All these thoughts are not there with children. They learn very fast. So when people ask me, when do you start teaching mindfulness to children? As they're already mindful, we just tell them that you are mindful, use your mindfulness. So what happens actually? Because this story of meditation is going on for a very long time. For last 1950 is the time when they really started working on the meditation. It's only when mindful meditation came that people became very, very serious about how actually meditation works. Till then, there were only EEGs, and EEGs, as we know, are not a very, very specific test to understand how the brain functions. Then came the computer science, then came the MRI, the PET scans, everything came and they could study mindfulness in the how it affects the brain. And with functional MRI, they have been also able to study how the neurotransmitters work and how the neurotransmitter function is regulated. I'll talk about it a moment later. So these are the areas which start actually changing. We know it as a neuroplasticity now. So the neuroplastic is you create new connections, and the connections become thicker when they use it. To begin with, they are like just a country road, and then it becomes a highway, then it becomes an expressway. So you create new connections all the time. Because why? Because it's the amygdala. Amygdala shrinks; it becomes smaller. That means it's not bombarded with so many sensations, and it says, "Be quiet now." And we know that attention regulation gives rise to better goal orientation behavior happens. Decreased activity, increased activity is very clearly seen in the prefrontal cortex. The connection of all the temporoparietal area comes into. That is why we get new ideas, because you create new associations. So now the recent thing is they're talking about how mindfulness works on plants. So all this is happening, and where does the compassion actually take place? And they have found that mindfulness is connected with the 5 most important neurotransmitters and hormones. Serotonin, we know for sure it is connected to sleep and sex and appetite and everything. Add acetylcholine, because that's the one which keeps you active. Third is norepinephrine, which is the first thing happens after stress. Dopamine and oxytocin. So SANDO, SANDO, serotonin, acetylcholine, norepinephrine, dopamine, and oxytocin. Dopamine is the feel-good hormone, and feel-good neurotransmitter, and oxytocin is the hug hormone. That's why people feel more affectionate towards each other. So that's not what we want in resilience. Yes, we do want that, because there is a compassion for self. You feel like hugging yourself, like hugging the reality. So when they say you have to learn to live with the virus, you have to learn to with the reality, that means we are not pushing the reality, we're kind of embracing the reality and understanding the reality, and the fear is slowly should go down, and we should be able to live with it. Because we're living with so many other disorders. We are living in so many communicable diseases like influenza, like dengue, like malaria. So many disorders are there which are infective, and still they are rampant much more than COVID. So I think when they say learn to live with the corona, it's not a pessimistic thought. It's a thought which says that this is the reality and learn to live with this reality. Take precautions. Be very aware of what you're doing. So the very first post that came about mindfulness was how to be mindful about not touching your face. Very interesting. How to be mindful about 20 seconds of hand washing. How to be mindful about wearing your mask, not touching the mask. So all these are mindful because these are all automatic reactions. But when you are mindful, you know you're doing it, so you can stop it. It's like when you want to change the speed, you want to accelerate. When you want to change the gear, what do? You first push the clutch. You give pause to the engine and say, now I'm going to change my gear. So you can't change the gear without pressing the clutch. So this mindfulness, this moment is like pressing the clutch and just becoming aware of what am I right now? Am I giving these reactions? Stop. It's like a yellow signal. It says, stop, don't do that. Slow down. It's going to be red now. So rather than seeing the red, see the yellow signals. And body is always giving you yellow signals. Body is always giving you these cautions. Only we can miss it. And when we are mindful, we become aware of it. So the last one, which talks about autopilot to mindfulness. And this is how the stimulus reactions to stimulus, mindfulness, and response. That is what happens in mindfulness. So it's a mindful meditation that we did just now, where how meditation and mindfulness are different. Meditation is just experiencing the tranquility. Mindfulness is being aware that you are aware, knowing that you are doing this, knowing that this is what is passing through your mind. Because tranquility and peace and feeling nice cannot be there with every meditation. No, your mind is very unstable. Just be with the unstable mind and the instability goes. So when I say, what is the first step of mindfulness? When you know that you are mindless, first step of mindfulness, you know that you are mindless. Otherwise, I really didn't know that my mind was wandering. When I say my mind was wandering, say, please come back, please come back, please come back and be with me, be here, be in this body. So these are the benefits of mindfulness, that it reduces stress and anxiety, improves mood and working memory, prevents relapse of depression, increases emotional intelligence, and develops awareness and resilience. So mindfulness is the first step to resilience. I've said what I wanted to say. It's almost almost an hour that I'm speaking to you. I would like to check if there are any questions. I can switch off the slides and I'll be visible now, not just as a small postage stamp, but as a picture.
Thanks, sir, for excellent presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.
We will be mindful henceforth, and it will be very much helpful in our practice and in current scenario. There are few questions. Dr. Prafulla Tamaskar has asked one question related to this COVID. How to handle the death of our near friend or any news of any doctor dying? So that is one of the main hurting every time to us.
Yes, I know. See, number one is we are going to react. There's no doubt about it. We are going to feel the pain. We are going to feel the loss. We are going to feel terribly hurt. We are going to be scared. We are going to be fearful. All these are natural reactions. This happens to everyone. And grief is a normal reaction. You say, I must be able to take it very bravely. Don't show braveness. Let it sink in. And slowly the braveness will come. So maybe if you're feeling really sad, you're feeling really bad about things the way they are happening, pause, go through the grief, go through this phase of feeling very upset, feeling very angry. You know, for sure, Amar will know, we talked about the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is the reaction in mental healing. The first step of denial, then there is anger, then there is anxiety, there is bargaining. अरे उससे क्यों नहीं है, इसको ये मर जाता तो अच्छा होता, ये तो बुड्ढा है, ये तो जवानी में मर गया. So we are always bargaining with the truth, as if by desiring it, it's like on the street you bargain 100 का 50 में दे दो. That's what happens in reality. That's bargaining. Then there is a phase of feeling really low, sad, depressed, and then there is a phase of resolution. So this is going to be there. But understand that if you are feeling sorry, you are feeling sad, accept it as the moment of truth. It's a very interesting story. I think one who asked me, I like to tell a story, a very small story of the two monks. They were attached to their guru. The guru was very old and dying. And this is a very popular story with Rajneesh. So the old monk is dying, old guru is dying. So they sit near him, and the old monk finally had his last breath. And the older monk starts. The two of them are there. One is young, the other one is senior to him. So the senior monk starts crying so much. The younger monk says, "Oh my God, you are a monk. How can you cry?" And the answer to that question was beautiful. He said, "I'm not crying that I'm crying. I know I'm feeling sad. I've accepted my sadness. This is part of my life. Being human, it is all right to feel sad. So don't fight with sadness. It's going to be there. It will slowly sink in. But if you are aware of it, you'll be able to glide over this. This wave of depression, this wave of grief will gently pass. And you will come back to your resolution phase. You'll become more resilient."
Yes, thank you, sir. So all anxiety and other depressive
Yes.
any emotions in current scenario, I
Yes.
think they are normal, and
Yes.
everybody should think it is not a depression.
Yeah.
Chetan, do you want to ask one question?
Yeah, yeah. There was one question from Dr. Nivedita Bedmuta. She's asking how to deal with the people who are not resilient. If you are
Okay.
yourself resilient, but those who are not, trying to target you because they are not.
Okay.
Does targeting suggest an escape mechanism of non-resilient, insecure
Yes.
people? Should we
Yeah.
ignore them for our own peace, or should we suggest them
Number
that they are wrong?
Yeah. Okay. Number one. See, when people are non-resilient people around us, people who are sad, upset, angry, they are usually in that angry mode. They are always point fingers to someone. So if you are close to them, you become the easy target. So the doctors become easy target because they are there, and they're the softest target because they have no arms with them. So we become easy targets. So we need to have protection, no doubt about it. But when that happens, when non-resilient people are there at home, at your own place, your elderly parents or your spouse or your children, very important, you don't get angry, you don't get upset, you don't become very anxious. Why are you so non-resilient? No, that's how he lives his life. Understand, this is how he is reacting. This is his normal reaction. So if you are calm, people tend to become calm with you, because when we are angry, whenever people are angry, the first response that we give, reaction that we give, that we also become mad. So when we respond to non-resilient people, we can remain calm, and if we remain calm, we choose the right kind of response. And many times when people start arguing, say, "Oh, you seem to be very angry, you seem to be very upset, you seem to be very anxious." Because people who are anxious, angry, and upset usually do not verbalize that they are feeling this way. They are actually verbalizing something else. They're usually talking about how they are feeling bad about it. Usually they are generalizing it. So when you allow them to verbalize, say, "Okay, you seem to be very angry and upset. I can understand that you seem to be angry and upset because this is a reaction that is you are having right now. Just be with me. If you want to learn, I can teach you how to handle yourself. Just be with me." Last time, I think I talked with Amar, and I told the psychiatrist friend, is that first thing when our people are upset, when they are non-resilient, I tell them our patients are all non-resilient. They are very angry, they are upset, they are depressed, blah blah blah. So they sit and I say, "Okay, let's see. Let's breathe together. Long deep breath, exhale slowly. Long deep breath, exhale slowly. Very, very important that you do it together. Because when you do that together, you're on the same wavelength, you're on the same page, and you have the same energy that you start transmitting to your patient, and they become calm. So that's very important that non-resilient people tend to make you non-resilient. Remain in what you are, remain in your calm state, and say that, look, these are your reactions. I would like you to respond rather than react. And let's breathe together. So first aid always helps.
Absolutely, sir.
Amar, you can
Uh, Dr. Dharmendra Kendre, psychiatrist,
Yes.
he's asking, is there any relationship between alpha state of mind and mindfulness?
Yes, alpha state of mind was earlier talked about when they talked about EEG, the alpha rhythm. But now we don't speak about alpha state of mind. Of course, it's very popular in the popular psychology, but we talk about a mindful state, which is this I discussed with you. It's similar to alpha state of mind.
Okay. Can you, Chetan?
can we practice meditation and mindfulness together?
Oh yeah, mindful. Okay, very interesting. Meditation is a skill which you learn to become mindful. It's like Lata Mangeshkar is rehearses her song and gives a final performance. So when she's rehearsing, she's meditating, but when she's singing, she's mindful meditation. Because see, very simple. If she when मेरे वतन के लोगों सब सुनते सबके आंखों में पानी आता है, but Lata Mangeshkar didn't cry. If she had started crying, she would not be able to sing. So she knows that this is the emotion that is generated in people. But if I experience it right now, I'll control it. Emotional regulation. She's a Maha intelligent woman and highly evolved person. So she need not go mindful meditation. She's actually living mindful meditation. A classical singer is in mindful meditation state. And but his practice at home is meditation. So he requires both.
Yes. Similar question from Dr. Mangalavani. What is the
Yes.
difference between mindfulness and meditation?
Okay.
What is the difference?
Mindfulness is the state of awareness. Mind meditation state of awareness and awareness of awareness. That means you know that you are aware. So it's like I know I'm aware, and if I know I'm aware, I can modify, change my awareness. In meditation, it's just an experience of tranquility when everything seems to be simmering down. See, after all, ultimately, what we want to do is we want to create a state of mind where there is a lot of resilience, where we can get out of the situation, where we remain calm, focused in present moment, and learn how to handle difficult situations. So meditation is one way of doing it. Mindful meditation is another way. Why this branching came essentially because Buddha learned meditation. He said that's not helping me. I must do something more, and that's how we discovered mindful meditation.
Yes. Chetan? Question.
Yeah, I think there are no more questions. All questions are equally sorted out with sir. And now, henceforward, our mind is
one question.
Okay.
Can we use mindfulness in children?
Mm-hmm.
Because currently in lockdown,
Yeah,
children
yeah,
are very much frustrated.
yeah. Children actually, when children are playing, they're mindful. When they're playing Logo, they just forget the whole world, and there is no sense of time and space. They're in mindful. Children are mindful. Only they don't know that they're mindful. So if we make them aware that look, this is a moment of enjoyment for you. When you're doing this, you're completely there. So I'm teaching my granddaughter mindful meditation with belly breathing. Just focus on the breath, focus on the breath, focus on the breath, and do it together. And she finds it so nice, so soothing, because they can be taught, because they are curious. I mean, they are not skeptics. So children learn fast. Adults are skeptics, they are cynical, they are suspicious. Children are at best time to learn. Everywhere, if you see, there are about some 20,000 schools in US today are teaching mindfulness meditation to young children. Our very famous Kiran Bedi, the one who is now governor at Puducherry, she taught mindful meditation, Vipassana, to the inmates of Tihar jail, and she could see the transformation. So this can be taught everywhere. I say organizations are factories which create psychosomatic disorders. They can learn to be mindful. We need to work on mindful leadership, which is based on compassion, which is based on innovation, and we are going to require that because we require to be innovative now, because we have to compete with China, we have to compete with so many people. Unless we are innovative, unless we transform it, we'll not be able to survive in this world. We'll be rushed over by smaller countries. Vietnam will take over. Bangladesh has already taken over. So we'll be run over by the world if we don't innovate and don't become mindful.
Sir, how should we start it? Are there any
Okay.
guidance, books,
Okay.
or any application?
I've already given you a small, very, not even a promo, a teaser of mindful meditation. It's really not difficult. There is no mantra. There is nothing. You can use mantra. Of course, it's an object on which you concentrate. So the easiest object, which is 24/7 available to you, and so long as you're alive, you can become aware of your breath. So focusing on breath is very important. To start up, try it for a few seconds, try it for a few minutes. And the first thing that you will say that I can't do that, I can't concentrate, I don't seem to get it. And if you say that, there is every reason for you to practice it. You say, I can't concentrate, that's why you need to do it. And people say, because I can't concentrate, I am not doing it. So if you start doing it, you'll be able to concentrate. Because it's something that, this is a survival. Mind is wandering. वो रुकता नहीं है. उसको train करना पड़ता है. So it's a monkey mind. It keeps on jumping. Give it a food and it will remain quiet. So this is very important that we start slow, not still. I'll sit still for 1 hour. No, that's not possible. They say, surgeons will know, you have to, the fourth assistant just holds the artery forceps at some point, then slowly becomes the comes the surgeon. So slowly we graduate, and I recommend 20 minutes every day, 8 weeks, and you will feel the difference. 20 minutes every day, 8 weeks, 20 minutes we can't spare for ourselves. We can, of course, everybody can. If you take shower, if you go to shit, you go to sit on the potty, you eat your food, you fight with people. 20 minutes yourself.
I think mindfulness meditation is much useful in patients also.
Yes.
I think before surgery also many patients
Yes.
can do it.
Yes.
And they will be much comfortable, even family members.
So very important word that I have not used particularly for practicing doctors is a part of mindfulness and part of resilience is known as flow state. Mihaly is the first one who used the word flow state, where your thoughts, emotions, and actions are effortless. Now, some of the surgeons I've seen as a medical student, they seem to be in a flow state. They seem to be enjoying it. They seem to be just completely there with the knot that they're tying. Of course, nowadays they don't tie knots, but whatever they're doing, laparoscopy or whatever that they're doing, they're completely with it, they're completely into it. So that completeness is the flow state. And once you practice it, you will remain in a flow state. When I'm speaking to people, I'm in a flow state.
Thank you, sir. Chetan, conclude the session with the
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot. It was really a mindful session.
Thank you.
How to mind our mind. It was
Yes.
really mesmerizing. It creates a new awareness and new anxiety. How I want to learn it more now. And definitely, I'm going to trouble you more.
Yeah.
Thank you for guiding us. Thank you all of the members who are there who logged in timely and to us patiently. Thanks to AMC, Associate Medical Consultant Pune, for giving us the platform. Pune Surgical Society, PSS, who is also a partner, and IMA Thane. So all of these three members have joined us to get an insight on our mindfulness. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. So we'll close the meeting. Thank you.